We needed it more than you, my brother-in-law Carson smirked as I stared at my empty bank account. 3 days after our family reunion in Willowcrest, everything I'd saved was gone. When I discovered how they pulled it off, I realized my husband's family had been planning this betrayal for months. I'm Sophia Martinez. I'm 32, and until that Monday morning in September, I thought I finally had my life figured out. Not in the Instagram perfect way where everything looks flawless, but in the real way where you can actually sleep at night without your stomach churning about money. My apartment in Rosehaven Commons wasn't fancy, but it was mine. 1 bedroom, decent kitchen, and a little balcony where I grew herbs that somehow didn't die despite my questionable gardening skills. I worked as a marketing coordinator at Beacon Digital Solutions, pulling in $52,000 a year. Not enough to live lavishly, but enough to pay my bills, put gas in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, and still have something left over. For the first time in my adult life, I had an emergency fund, $8,347. It had taken me exactly 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days to save it. I know because I'd been tracking every deposit, every sacrifice, every time I chose ramen over takeout or Netflix over a night out. $8,000 might not sound like much to some people, but to me, it was freedom. It was the difference between panic and peace when my car made that weird grinding noise. It was knowing that if I got sick or lost my job, I wouldn't have to move back in with my parents in Crescent Falls or beg friends for money. My husband, Nathan Reed, understood what that money meant to me. We'd been married for 4 years, together for 6, and he'd watched me stress about finances through most of our relationship. He'd seen me cry over student loan payments and skip meals to make rent. When I finally hit that $8,000 milestone, he took me out to dinner at Giuseppe's, not because we could afford it, but because he said achievements like that deserved celebration. "You did this," he'd said, raising his glass of house wine. "All those months of meal prep and couponing and saying no to things. You actually did it." I'd felt so proud, so secure, so stupid, as it turned out. The family reunion in Willowcrest was Nathan's idea. His parents, Douglas and Patricia Reed, owned a lake house there, inherited from Nathan's grandfather about 5 years ago. It was the sprawling log cabin thing with a wraparound porch and a dock that jutted out into Lake Clearwater. Every September, the entire Reed clan descended on it for what they called their annual gathering. This was only my second time attending. The first had been 2 years ago, right after Nathan and I got married. I'd been nervous then, trying too hard to fit in with his family's loud, boisterous dynamic. This time, I felt more confident. I was part of the family now. I belonged. The Reeds were different from my family in every possible way. Where my parents were quiet, practical people who measured their words carefully, the Reeds filled every room with laughter and stories and good-natured arguments about everything from politics to the best way to grill corn. They were huggers, all of them, the kind of people who said, "I love you" at the end of every phone call and meant it. Nathan's older brother Carson was the life of every party, tall, charming, with the kind of easy confidence that made people gravitate toward him. He worked in finance, something involving investments and portfolios that I never quite understood despite his attempts to explain it. He was married to Violet, a kindergarten teacher with curly red hair and an infectious laugh. Nathan's younger sister Jade had just gotten engaged to her longtime boyfriend Marcus. She was 28, worked as a physical therapist, and had the kind of effortless style that made me feel like I'd gotten dressed in the dark. Marcus was a software engineer. Quiet, but funny once you got him talking. The youngest Reed sibling was Austin, 24, and fresh out of college with a degree in environmental science. He was the family idealist, full of passion for saving the world and convinced that his generation would be the one to fix everything. Nathan's parents rounded out the crew. Douglas was a retired high school principal, still broad-shouldered and authoritative even in his 70s. Patricia had been a nurse for 40 years before retiring, and she had that particular combination of warmth and no-nonsense efficiency that made you want to both hug her and follow her orders. I'd spent weeks preparing for this reunion. I made my grandmother's tres leches cake, the recipe that had taken me years to perfect. I bought thoughtful gifts for everyone, a vintage cookbook for Patricia, who collected them, craft beer from a local brewery for Douglas, a set of fancy candles for Jade's new apartment, outdoor gear for Austin's hiking adventures. I even found a first edition copy of Carson's favorite business book at a used bookstore in downtown Rosehaven. The total came to $347. I remember because I'd budgeted for it carefully, setting aside money for 3 months so I wouldn't have to touch my emergency fund. We drove up to Willowcrest on Friday afternoon, Nathan behind the wheel of our Civic while I managed snacks and directions from the passenger seat. The lake house was exactly as I remembered, rustic but comfortable, with worn leather furniture and family photos covering every surface. The air smelled like pine and lake water, and there was something peaceful about being surrounded by so much nature.
Friday night was casual. We grilled burgers and sat around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and catching up on everyone's lives. Carson regaled us with stories from his latest business trip to Portland. Jade showed off her engagement ring for the 100th time, and nobody minded because her happiness was infectious. Austin talked about his new job with an environmental consulting firm in Brightwater City. I felt good that night, relaxed in a way I hadn't been in months. Nathan's hand in mine, his family's easy acceptance, the crackling fire, and the sound of laughter carrying across the water. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Saturday was the main event. Patricia had planned an elaborate lunch with all of Nathan's aunts, uncles, and cousins coming up from Pine Haven and Maplewood. The house filled with voices and the chaos of kids running around while adults tried to have conversations over the noise. I spent most of the morning in the kitchen with Patricia and Violet, helping prepare food and listening to family stories I'd never heard before. Patricia told me about Nathan as a little boy, how he used to collect rocks and organize them by color and size. Violet shared embarrassing stories about Carson's college years that made me laugh until my sides hurt. Around noon, I realized I'd left my phone upstairs. I'd been so caught up in the conversations and cooking that I hadn't checked it in hours. When I finally retrieved it from the bedroom Nathan and I were sharing, I saw several missed calls from my bank. That should have been my first warning. But it was Saturday afternoon of a holiday weekend, and I was having such a good time that I didn't think much of it. Banks were always calling about something: fraud protection alerts, promotional offers, reminders about upcoming payments. I made a mental note to call them back on Monday and forgot about it. The rest of Saturday passed in a blur of good food, family photos, and more stories around the fire pit. Sunday was quieter, just immediate family, a lazy morning, and a big breakfast before everyone started packing up to leave. Carson was the last to say goodbye, loading his family's weekend bags into his BMW, while his twin daughters, Lily and Rose, ran around the yard one final time. He gave me one of his signature bear hugs and said something that seemed sweet at the time. "Thanks for being such a generous part of this family, Sophia. People like you make everything possible." I'd smiled and hugged him back, thinking he was just being nice. Carson was always saying things like that, big, warm statements that made you feel special and appreciated. Nathan and I drove home Sunday evening, both of us tired but happy. We stopped for dinner at a little roadside diner, splitting a piece of pie and talking about how nice it had been to see everyone. Nathan seemed particularly relaxed, more so than I'd seen him in months. "Your family is amazing," I told him as we walked back to the car. "I'm so glad we went." "They love you," he said, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "Carson especially. He kept saying how lucky I am to have found someone so generous and understanding." That word, generous, should have stuck with me, should have made me ask questions, but it didn't. I was too happy, too full of good feelings and family warmth to read anything into it. We got home around 9 p.m. Sunday night. I was exhausted, so we went straight to bed after unpacking the car. I fell asleep thinking about Jade's wedding plans and Patricia's promise to share her famous pot roast recipe. Monday morning started normally. I made coffee, kissed Nathan goodbye as he left for his job at the accounting firm, and settled in to work from home. Beacon Digital had flexible remote work policies, so I often spent Mondays catching up on emails and project planning from my dining room table. Around 10 a.m., I decided to pay our monthly bills. Rent was due Tuesday, utilities were coming up, and I like to stay ahead of things. I opened my laptop, logged into our joint checking account, and felt my world tilt off its axis. Balance, $47.23. I stared at the number, blinking hard like that would change it. We'd had over $1,200 in checking when we left for the reunion. Not a fortune, but enough to cover rent and utilities with some left over. My hands started shaking as I navigated to our savings account, the one with my precious emergency fund. Balance, 0. I refreshed the page, still 0. I logged out completely and logged back in, thinking maybe there was a glitch in the system. Sometimes banking websites got overwhelmed or had technical issues. Same numbers. That's when I saw it, buried in the transaction history like a landmine. Saturday, September 14th, 2:47 p.m. Wire transfer, $8,347. Emergency Family Fund, authorized by account holder. 2:47 p.m. Saturday, while I was in the kitchen with Patricia and Violet, learning how to make her famous potato salad. While I was laughing and feeling grateful to be part of this warm, loving family. Someone had emptied my savings account. My first thought was fraud. Someone had hacked our account, stolen our information somehow. My second thought was panic. How are we going to pay rent? How are we going to eat this week? My third thought was interrupted by my phone buzzing with a text message. Carson Reed. Hey, Sophia, thanks again for being so generous with the family loan. You're honestly the best sister-in-law ever. The kids are going to love their new school, and Violet and I will never forget this kindness. Love you. I read the message 3 times before the words actually penetrated. Family loan.
I hadn't given anyone a family loan. I hadn't authorized any wire transfers. I hadn't even known that anyone in Nathan's family needed money. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial Nathan's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. I called his office. Whitmore and Associates, this is Janet. Hi, Janet. It's Sophia Ride. Is Nathan available? Oh, hi, Sophia. He called in sick this morning. Said he had food poisoning from the weekend. Isn't he home with you? Food poisoning? No, he left for work this morning like normal. A pause. Oh, well, he definitely called in around 8:30, said he'd probably be out all day. Nathan had lied to his office, and he'd lied to me. I hung up and immediately called him again. This time, he answered on the first ring. Hey, babe, what's up? Nathan, my voice came out strange, tight and high. Where are you? Work, obviously. Why? Your office said you called in sick. Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Nathan? Yeah, I'm here. I just stepped out for coffee. Janet must have gotten confused. Someone emptied our savings account. Another silence. This one even longer. That's impossible. Nobody has access to that account except us. $8,000, Nathan. Gone. And Carson just texted me thanking me for a family loan that I never made. I heard something in the background. Voices, the sound of a door closing. I'll call you back, okay? Let me figure out what's going on. Nathan, wait. The line went dead. I sat there in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of my normal Monday morning, half-finished coffee, laptop open to work emails, the little stack of bills I'd been planning to pay, and felt my entire world crack open. $8,000. 2 years of sacrifice. Gone. And my husband, the man who'd celebrated that achievement with me, who'd watched me stress and save and scrimp for every penny, he was somewhere other than work, lying to both me and his office, while his brother sent me cheerful texts about money I'd never agreed to give. I looked around my apartment, our apartment, and suddenly everything felt different. The photos on the walls, the furniture we'd chosen together, the life we'd built. How much of it was real? How much of it was just me, living in a story that everyone else knew was fiction? My phone buzzed again. Another text from Carson. Also, don't worry about payback timeline. We know things are tight for you guys too. Family helps family, right? No pressure at all. No pressure at all. Like he was doing me a favor by stealing my money. I set the phone down and walked to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the mirror. The same face that had been smiling and laughing just 2 days ago, surrounded by people I'd thought I could trust. We needed it more than you. That's what Carson had said in his smirk, according to my gut feeling. And somehow I knew with absolute certainty that those words were coming. That when I finally confronted him, when I demanded answers, that's exactly what he'd say. Because apparently my husband's family had decided that my emergency fund wasn't really mine at all. It was just money sitting around waiting for them to need it more than I did. And Nathan, my husband, my partner, the person who was supposed to protect me and our shared future, he was somewhere out there, lying to me about where he was, while his family celebrated their theft with emoji-filled text messages. I walked back to the dining room and stared at my laptop screen, at those numbers that had changed my life. $47.23 in checking, $0 in savings. This was only the beginning. I could feel it in my bones, the way you feel a storm coming before you see the clouds. Whatever was happening, whatever they'd done, it was bigger than just the money. And I was about to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went. Let me take you back to who I was before that Monday morning, destroying everything I thought I knew about my life. Because to understand how devastating this betrayal was, you need to understand what I'd built, what I'd worked for, and what I thought I had. 6 months earlier, I'd been sitting in this same dining room, calculator in hand, spreadsheets open on my laptop, finally hitting that magical number I'd been chasing for over 2 years. $8,347 in my emergency fund. I remember taking a screenshot of the bank balance, not to show off to anyone, but just to prove to myself that it was real. I'd grown up in a house where money was always tight. My parents, Miguel and Carmen Martinez, had immigrated from El Salvador when I was 3 years old. My father worked construction, my mother cleaned houses, and every dollar was accounted for, stretched, and worried over. I learned early that financial security wasn't something you could take for granted. It was something you fought for, penny by penny. Mija, my mother used to say, money doesn't grow on trees, but it can grow in the bank if you're smart about it. She'd show me her little notebook where she tracked every expense, every saved quarter, every small victory. When I got my first job at 16, scooping ice cream at Sweetie's Parlor in downtown Crescent Falls, she helped me open my first savings account. Never touch this money unless it's a real emergency, she told me, as we sat in the bank lobby filling out paperwork. Not for clothes, not for fun, not because you want something, only for emergencies. I'd followed that advice religiously through high school, college, and into my adult life. Even when my college friends were going on spring break trips I couldn't afford, even when I had to wear the same 3 dresses to every job interview, even when my car broke down and I had to choose between fixing it or eating anything other than ramen for a month. The emergency fund represented more than money to me. It represented safety, independence, and the promise that I'd never have to call my parents asking for help they couldn't afford to give. It represented nights of actual sleep instead of lying awake calculating whether I could afford groceries and rent in the same week. Building that fund while living in Rosehaven Commons and working at Beacon Digital had been like climbing a mountain in small, deliberate steps. My salary of $52,000 sounded decent on paper, but after taxes, student loan payments, rent, car insurance, groceries, and utilities, there wasn't much left over. I'd become a master of small savings, buying generic brands, cooking at home, finding free entertainment, shopping my own closet instead of buying new clothes. My apartment reflected this careful approach to money. The furniture was a mix of hand-me-downs from family, Craigslist finds, and a few pieces I'd saved up for specifically. The couch had come from my grandmother when she moved to a retirement community.
The coffee table was something I'd refinished myself after finding it at a garage sale. The dining room table, where I was now sitting in shock, was a Facebook Marketplace score. Solid wood, good bones, just needed some TLC. I'd made the space my own with plants, cheap and cheerful, books, library sales and used bookstores, and photographs I'd printed myself. It wasn't Pinterest perfect, but it was home. It was mine. And for the first time in my adult life, it felt secure. Nathan had moved in 18 months after we got married, selling his bachelor pad apartment in downtown Brightwater City. The transition had been surprisingly smooth. He wasn't much of a decorator, so he appreciated what I'd already built. He was tidy, reliable about his share of expenses, and respectful of my need to budget carefully. "You're so good at this stuff," he'd say, watching me organize our monthly expenses or research the best deal on car insurance. "I never learned how to handle money properly. My family just spent whatever they had and figured it out later." That should have been a red flag. Looking back now, I can see how many red flags I'd ignored or rationalized away. But at the time, I thought I was helping him learn better habits. I thought I was being a good influence. Nathan's approach to money was the opposite of mine in almost every way. Where I planned, he improvised. Where I saved, he spent. Where I worried, he assumed things would work out. It wasn't malicious. He just came from a different world, a family where money was more fluid, where someone always stepped in when times got tough. The Reed family operated on what Nathan called family socialism. Everyone contributed what they could, everyone took what they needed, and it all balanced out in the end. It sounded nice in theory, warm and communal and supportive. In practice, it meant that boundaries were fluid, financial independence was seen as selfishness, and saying no to a family member's request for money was tantamount to betrayal. I'd learned this gradually over the 4 years Nathan and I had been married. There was always someone in the Reed family who needed help. Carson's business venture that required a small investment, Jade's car that needed major repairs right before her wedding, Austin's unpaid internship that his parents subsidized, Douglas and Patricia's property taxes that came due at an inconvenient time. And Nathan always helped. Always. Sometimes it was money from his own checking account. Sometimes it was co-signing loans. Sometimes it was just emotional support and advice. But he never said no to family. "They'd do the same for us," he'd tell me whenever I expressed concern about his generosity. "Family takes care of family." I'd grown up with a similar value system, but with different practical applications. In my family, taking care of each other meant helping when you truly could afford it, not putting yourself at financial risk. It meant offering what you had, time, labor, emotional support, rather than money you didn't have to spare. But I'd adapted to Nathan's way of thinking, or at least I'd tried to. When Carson needed $500 for his home business startup, Nathan had lent it without hesitation. When Jade's transmission died 3 months before her wedding, Nathan had contributed $800 toward the repair bill. When Austin graduated college and needed help with deposits for his first apartment, Nathan had sent $400. None of these amounts were huge individually, but they added up. Over the course of our marriage, Nathan had probably given his family close to $3,000 in various forms of help. Money we could have used for our own emergencies, our own future. But I'd kept my mouth shut because I loved Nathan and I could see how much his family meant to him. I'd grown up watching my parents sacrifice for extended family back in El Salvador, sending money they couldn't really afford because it was the right thing to do. I understood the pull of family obligation. But I'd adapted to Nathan's way of thinking, or at least I'd tried to. When Carson needed $500 for his home business startup, Nathan had lent it without hesitation. When Jade's transmission died 3 months before her wedding, Nathan had contributed $800 toward the repair bill. When Austin graduated college and needed help with deposits for his first apartment, Nathan had sent $400. None of these amounts were huge individually, but they added up. Over the course of our marriage, Nathan had probably given his family close to $3,000 in various forms of help. Money we could have used for our own emergencies, our own future. But I'd kept my mouth shut because I loved Nathan, and I could see how much his family meant to him. I'd grown up watching my parents sacrifice for extended family back in El Salvador, sending money they couldn't really afford because it was the right thing to do. I understood the pull of family obligation. What I didn't understand, what I'd been too naive to see, was that the Reed family's definition of family helping family was apparently one-directional.
Nathan gave and gave and gave, but when had any of them ever helped us? When Nathan's car had broken down 2 years ago, requiring a $1,200 repair, had his well-off brother Carson offered to help? No. We'd depleted our small savings account and spent months building it back up. When I'd been laid off from my previous job and we'd struggled for 3 months while I found new work, had his parents offered assistance? No. We'd lived on Nathan's salary alone, eating pasta and generic cereal, skipping movies and dinners out, while I applied for jobs and freelanced whenever I could find work. When we'd had to replace our refrigerator after it died suddenly, flooding our kitchen and requiring expensive repairs, had any of the Reds stepped in? No. We'd put it on a credit card and spent 8 months paying it off. But somehow, we were always available when they needed help, and Nathan never seemed to notice the imbalance. I'd told myself it didn't matter. I'd told myself that marriage meant accepting your partner's family, quirks and all. I'd told myself that my job was to support Nathan, not to police his relationships with his siblings. Besides, the Reds were genuinely warm, welcoming people. They'd embraced me from the beginning, including me in family jokes and traditions, remembering my birthday, asking about my work and my family. Patricia had taught me her pie crust recipe. Douglas had helped me change my oil when Nathan was out of town. Carson had given me career advice when I was considering switching jobs. They felt like family in all the ways that mattered. The only family I'd ever had outside of my parents, who lived 3 hours away in Crescent Falls and whom I saw maybe 4 times a year. The Reds were present, involved, interested in our lives in ways that felt supportive rather than intrusive. Or so I'd thought. Now, sitting in my dining room with my empty bank account and Carson's cheerful text message, I was starting to see those relationships differently. Had their warmth been genuine, or had it been investment in a future payoff? Had their interest in my life been real, or had they been gathering information they could use later? I thought about the conversations I'd had with Patricia during the reunion, how she'd asked about my job, my salary, whether Nathan and I were planning to buy a house soon. I'd answered honestly, even mentioning that we were starting to save for a down payment, that I was hoping to have enough for a modest starter home in a few years. "That's so smart," she'd said. "You're so responsible with money, Sophia. Nathan is lucky to have someone who can keep him on track financially." At the time, I'd taken it as a compliment. Now I wondered if it had been reconnaissance. I thought about Carson's questions about my work, how he'd seemed so interested in my marketing role, asking about my salary range, my benefits, whether I had good job security. I'd been flattered by his attention, thinking he was just making conversation, maybe considering a career change himself. Now I wondered if he'd been calculating my worth, figuring out how much I could loan his family. I thought about the way Nathan had seemed unusually relaxed during the reunion, more carefree than I'd seen him in months. He'd joked with his siblings, played with his nieces, and spent hours talking with his father about everything from sports to politics. I'd assumed he was just happy to be with family. Now I wondered if he'd been relieved about something, if he'd known what was coming and felt good about it. The more I thought about it, the more details emerged that I'd missed at the time. Little comments, shared looks, conversations that had stopped when I entered a room. Saturday morning, when I'd come downstairs early and found Carson and Nathan talking quietly on the deck, their voices had stopped the moment they saw me. "Just talking about work stuff," Nathan had said, but neither of them worked in the same industry. Saturday afternoon, when I'd been in the kitchen helping Patricia, I'd heard Nathan on the phone in the next room. When I'd asked him about it later, he'd said it was just someone from his office with a quick question, but his office was closed on weekends. Saturday evening, when we'd all been sitting around the fire pit, Patricia had made a comment about how everything was working out perfectly for everyone. I'd assumed she meant Jade's engagement, Austin's new job, the successful family gathering. But the way everyone had smiled at each other, the way Nathan had squeezed my hand, had they been celebrating something else entirely? I felt sick thinking about it. Not just nauseous, but deeply, fundamentally sick, like something toxic was spreading through my system. These people, Nathan's family, the people I'd come to love and trust, had they been planning this for weeks, months? Had they seen me as a resource rather than a person? Had my careful savings, my financial responsibility, my emergency fund made me a target rather than someone to respect? And Nathan, God, Nathan, the man I'd married, the man I'd shared my fears and dreams with, the man who'd held me when I cried about money stress and celebrated with me when I hit my savings goals. Had he been part of this from the beginning?
What I didn't understand, what I'd been too naive to see, was that the Reed family's definition of family helping family was apparently one-directional. Nathan gave and gave and gave, but when had any of them ever helped us? When Nathan's car had broken down 2 years ago, requiring a $1,200 repair, had his well-off brother Carson offered to help? No. We'd depleted our small savings account and spent months building it back up. When I'd been laid off from my previous job and we'd struggled for 3 months while I found new work, had his parents offered assistance? No. We'd lived on Nathan's salary alone, eating pasta and generic cereal, skipping movies and dinners out, while I applied for jobs and freelanced whenever I could find work. When we'd had to replace our refrigerator after it died suddenly, flooding our kitchen and requiring expensive repairs, had any of the Reds stepped in? No. We'd put it on a credit card and spent 8 months paying it off. But somehow, we were always available when they needed help, and Nathan never seemed to notice the imbalance. I'd told myself it didn't matter. I'd told myself that marriage meant accepting your partner's family, quirks and all. I'd told myself that my job was to support Nathan, not to police his relationships with his siblings. Besides, the Reds were genuinely warm, welcoming people. They'd embraced me from the beginning, including me in family jokes and traditions, remembering my birthday, asking about my work and my family. Patricia had taught me her pie crust recipe. Douglas had helped me change my oil when Nathan was out of town. Carson had given me career advice when I was considering switching jobs. They felt like family in all the ways that mattered, the only family I'd ever had outside of my parents, who lived 3 hours away in Crescent Falls and whom I saw maybe 4 times a year. The Reds were present, involved, interested in our lives in ways that felt supportive rather than intrusive. Or so I'd thought. Now, sitting in my dining room with my empty bank account and Carson's cheerful text message, I was starting to see those relationships differently. Had their warmth been genuine, or had it been investment in a future payoff? Had their interest in my life been real, or had they been gathering information they could use later? I thought about the conversations I'd had with Patricia during the reunion, how she'd asked about my job, my salary, whether Nathan and I were planning to buy a house soon. I'd answered honestly, even mentioning that we were starting to save for a down payment, that I was hoping to have enough for a modest starter home in a few years. "That's so smart," she'd said. "You're so responsible with money, Sophia. Nathan is lucky to have someone who can keep him on track financially." At the time, I'd taken it as a compliment. Now I wondered if it had been reconnaissance. I thought about Carson's questions about my work, how he'd seemed so interested in my marketing role, asking about my salary range, my benefits, whether I had good job security. I'd been flattered by his attention, thinking he was just making conversation, maybe considering a career change himself. Now I wondered if he'd been calculating my worth, figuring out how much I could loan his family. I thought about the way Nathan had seemed unusually relaxed during the reunion, more carefree than I'd seen him in months. He'd joked with his siblings, played with his nieces, and spent hours talking with his father about everything from sports to politics. I'd assumed he was just happy to be with family. Now I wondered if he'd been relieved about something, if he'd known what was coming and felt good about it. The more I thought about it, the more details emerged that I'd missed at the time. Little comments, shared looks, conversations that had stopped when I entered a room. Saturday morning, when I'd come downstairs early and found Carson and Nathan talking quietly on the deck, their voices had stopped the moment they saw me. "Just talking about work stuff," Nathan had said, but neither of them worked in the same industry. Saturday afternoon, when I'd been in the kitchen helping Patricia, I'd heard Nathan on the phone in the next room. When I'd asked him about it later, he'd said it was just someone from his office with a quick question, but his office was closed on weekends. Saturday evening, when we'd all been sitting around the fire pit, Patricia had made a comment about how everything was working out perfectly for everyone.
I'd assumed she meant Jade's engagement, Austin's new job, the successful family gathering. But the way everyone had smiled at each other, the way Nathan had squeezed my hand, had they been celebrating something else entirely? I felt sick thinking about it. Not just nauseous, but deeply, fundamentally sick, like something toxic was spreading through my system. These people, Nathan's family, the people I'd come to love and trust, had they been planning this for weeks, months? Had they seen me as a resource rather than a person? Had my careful savings, my financial responsibility, my emergency fund made me a target rather than someone to respect? And Nathan, God, Nathan, the man I'd married, the man I'd shared my fears and dreams with, the man who'd held me when I cried about money stress and celebrated with me when I hit my savings goals. Had he been part of this from the beginning?
Nathan rubbed his face with both hands. Carson's in trouble, real trouble. His business is failing, and he owes money to some people who aren't patient about being paid back. I stared at him. What kind of people? The kind you don't want to owe money to. A chill ran down my spine. Nathan, what are you talking about? He borrowed money to invest in crypto last year, a lot of money, from private lenders who charge crazy interest rates. When the market crashed, he lost everything, but the debt didn't go away. It just kept growing. I felt like I was listening to him describe someone else's life. How much money? 40,000. With interest and penalties, it's closer to 60 now. The number hit me like a physical blow. $60,000? He's been trying to dig himself out for months, working extra jobs, selling everything he owns. But these people, they want their money now. They've been calling, showing up at his house. Violet's scared to let the kids play outside. I was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Part of me felt sympathetic. Carson, with his easy smile and bear hugs, terrified and desperate. Violet and the twin girls, innocent victims of his poor financial decisions. But a bigger part of me felt something else entirely. So you decided to steal my money to help him? We didn't steal. What would you call it? I turned to face him fully. I didn't authorize that transfer. I didn't agree to loan anyone money. I didn't even know Carson was in trouble. How is that not stealing? Nathan's shoulders sagged. You're right. God, you're right. It was wrong. I know it was wrong. Then why did you do it? He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because they said you'd understand. They said you'd want to help family. They? My parents, Carson, everyone. We talked about it at the reunion, and everyone agreed that you'd be okay with it once you understood the situation. I felt my face getting hot. You talked about stealing my money, and everyone agreed I'd be okay with it once you understood the situation? Not stealing, borrowing. Carson's going to pay it back. With what money, Nathan? You just told me he's broke and $60,000 in debt to dangerous people. He's got a plan. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop talking for a minute. I stood up and walked to the edge of the pond, watching the ducks paddle around in circles, their lives simple and predictable, in a way mine had been just hours ago. Behind me, I could hear Nathan's breathing, shaky and irregular. The thing that was breaking my heart wasn't just the money, though losing my entire emergency fund felt devastating. It wasn't even the deception, though that hurt more than I could have imagined. It was the assumption. They'd all sat around, Nathan's parents, his siblings, maybe even Violet, and decided that my money was available to solve Carson's problems. They'd discussed my savings account like it was a family resource, rather than something I'd worked for, sacrificed for, worried over for 2 years. And Nathan had participated in that conversation. How long have you known? I asked without turning around. Known what? About Carson's debt? About the plan to use my money?
Another long pause. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I turned back to face him. 3 weeks, and you didn't think to mention it to me? I wanted to find another way. I've been trying to help him figure out alternatives. What kind of alternatives? Loans, payment plans, maybe selling the house. Did any of those work out? He shook his head. So you decided to steal from me instead? Sophie, please don't use that word. What word should I use? What do you call it when taking someone's money without their permission? It's not permanent. Carson's going to pay me back with money he doesn't have from a business that's failing while he owes $60,000 to dangerous people. I sat back down on the bench, suddenly exhausted. Nathan moved closer, and I could smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn on our first date, the same one I'd bought him for Christmas every year. Familiar and comforting and wrong, all at the same time. I know how it sounds, he said, but Carson's not just my brother, he's my best friend. We've been through everything together. When my dad had his heart attack, Carson flew home from his business trip in the middle of the biggest deal of his career. When I was deciding whether to propose to you, he's the one who talked me through my fears. So that gives him the right to steal from your wife? He didn't steal from you. I did. The words hung in the air between us like poison. I felt something inside my chest crack open. You did. Yes. You accessed our savings account and transferred my money to your brother without telling me? Yes. Why I was at a family reunion, trusting you, trusting all of you. Yes. I wanted to hit him. The urge was so strong it scared me. I'd never felt violent toward another person in my life, but sitting there, listening to Nathan confirm that he'd betrayed me so casually, I understood for the first time how people ended up doing things they'd never thought themselves capable of. Instead, I gripped the edge of the bench and tried to breathe. How? I asked. How what?
How did you access the account? I never gave you my login information. Nathan looked uncomfortable. I've known your passwords for a while. How? You use the same one for everything. Your birthday backwards plus our anniversary year. He was right. I did use the same password for most things, a habit I knew was bad but had never gotten around to changing. But knowing my password and using it to steal from me were very different things. So you've been able to access my accounts this whole time? I never looked before. I swear, I only used it this once, for the emergency. Carson's debt isn't my emergency, Nathan. But it could have been all of our emergency. These people he owes money to, they don't just threaten the person who owes them, they threaten families. If something happened to Carson or Violet or the kids, that's not my responsibility. They're your family too. No, I said firmly, they're your family, and you chose them over me. That's not, you had a choice. Tell me about Carson's situation and ask for my help, or steal from me and hope I'd be okay with it after the fact. You chose to steal. Nathan was crying now, silent tears that he kept wiping away with the back of his hand. I was scared you'd say no. I might have. See? So what? So you decided to take that choice away from me entirely? I thought once you understood the situation, you'd see that it was the right thing to do. I stared at him, this man I'd married, this person who'd just admitted that he'd stolen from me because he'd assumed I'd be okay with it eventually. Like my consent was a formality he could skip if he had good enough reasons. Do you understand what you've done to us? I asked. I've saved my brother's life. You've destroyed my trust. Sophie, do you think I'll ever feel safe with you again? Do you think I'll ever be able to share a bank account with you, or make financial decisions with you, or plan for our future together? He looked stricken. It doesn't have to be like that. Doesn't it? How do I know you won't do this again the next time your family needs money? I won't, I promise.
Your promises don't mean anything anymore. We sat in silence for a while. The ducks had moved to the other side of the pond, and the elderly man who'd been feeding them was walking away. The mother and toddler were gone from the playground. It was just us and the growing afternoon shadows. "There's something else," Nathan said eventually. My stomach dropped. "What?" "The money. It's already gone." "What do you mean it's already gone?" "Carson had to pay his creditors immediately. The transfer went straight to them." "All of it?" "All of it." I felt the world tilt sideways. Somehow, I'd been holding on to the hope that the money was still sitting in Carson's account somewhere, that this could all be undone with a few phone calls and wire transfers. But if he's already paid his creditors, so even if I wanted to forgive you, even if I was willing to work through this, there's no way to get my money back. Carson's going to pay you back. He's got a plan. Stop saying that. I stood up so fast the bench rocked. Stop telling me about Carson's plan. Carson doesn't have a plan. If he had a plan, he wouldn't have needed to steal from me in the first place. A jogger running past looked over at us, probably wondering if he should intervene. I lowered my voice. $8,000, Nathan. 2 years of my life. Gone to pay off your brother's gambling debts. It wasn't gambling. Crypto speculation with borrowed money is gambling. And now his mess is my mess, except I never agreed to play. Nathan stood up too, reaching for my hands. I stepped back before he could touch me. "Sophie, I know you're angry." "I'm not angry. I'm devastated. We can fix this." "How?" "I don't know yet, but we can. We'll figure it out together." "There is no together anymore." "Don't say that. You chose your brother over me. You chose his financial irresponsibility over my financial security. You chose their approval over my trust. That's not what happened. Then explain to me what happened." Nathan ran his hands through his hair again, making it stick up in all directions. "My family needed help, and I helped them. With my money. With our money. No, it was my money, from my savings account, that I built, that you helped me celebrate when I reached my goal. We're married. Your money is our money." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Is that really what you think?" "Yes." "Then where's your contribution to Carson's emergency fund? Where's your $8,000? "I don't have $8,000. "Exactly. Because you're not the one who sacrifices and saves and worries about every expense. I am. And the minute I finally have something saved, your family decides it's community property." "Sophie, what's your salary, Nathan?" "What?" "Your salary. What do you make?" $48,000. "I make 52. I out-earn you, and I out-save you, and apparently that makes my money available for your family's emergencies." It's not about the money. It's completely about the money. If your parents had $8,000 sitting around, would Carson have asked them for it? Nathan didn't answer. If Jade had $8,000, would Carson have taken it? Still no answer. If Austin had $8,000? Okay, I get your point. Do you? Do you really? Because I don't think you understand that your family targeted me specifically because I was the only one responsible enough to have savings they could steal.
They didn't target you. Then why didn't Carson ask me himself? Because he knew you'd worry about it, and he didn't want to stress you out. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. He didn't want to stress me out, so instead he stole from me? He didn't steal from you. I transferred the money. On his behalf, with his knowledge, for his benefit. Yes, but so he stole from me, using you as the middleman. Nathan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed. "Who is it?" I asked. "Carson." "What does he want?" Nathan read the message, his face getting paler. "He's asking if I told you yet." "Told me what?" "About the money." "What exactly does he think you need to tell me?" Nathan showed me the phone. The message read, "Did you break the news to Sophie yet? Thanks again for handling this, bro. I owe you big time. Tell her I'll make this right, I promise." I read it twice, feeling sicker each time.
He thinks this is a favor you did for him. Sophie, he doesn't think he stole from me. He thinks you gave him a gift. That's not... Look at this message, Nathan. He's thanking you for handling this. Like I'm a problem that needed to be managed. I took the phone from his hands and scrolled up to see the earlier messages in their conversation. What I saw there made my legs go weak. Message after message between Nathan and Carson from the past 3 weeks. Planning, coordinating, discussing the Sophia situation and how to handle me after the fact. "You've been planning this for weeks?" I whispered. "Sophie, give me the phone. You've been texting with him about how to steal from me. It's not what it looks like." "What does this one mean?" I read from the screen. "Sophie's been talking about wanting to help family more. This might be easier than we thought." Nathan reached for the phone, but I held it away from him. "When did I say I wanted to help family more?" "At Easter. You said you wished we could do more for people we care about." "I was talking about my parents. I was talking about wanting to help my parents with their mortgage when my dad retires." "I know, but..." "And you told Carson that I wanted to help family more, so he'd think I'd be okay with this." "I was trying to make it easier for everyone." I scrolled through more messages, each one making me feel more betrayed. "Sophia doesn't need to know the details. We'll tell her it's a short-term loan," I read aloud. "She'll understand once we explain the situation." "Sophie, please. The reunion would be perfect timing. She'll be in a good mood, feeling close to everyone." I looked up at Nathan, who had gone completely pale. "You planned this for the reunion specifically? You waited until I was happy and relaxed and feeling like part of the family." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." I kept reading, feeling more sick with each message. "Mom thinks we should tell her it's for the kids' school, more sympathetic that way." "Oh my God," I stared at Nathan. "Your mother was in on this too?" "Everyone was worried about Carson. Everyone was planning to steal from me." I scrolled further. "Dad says Sophia's always been responsible with money. She'll have savings we can borrow from." I felt like I was going to throw up. "Your parents have been evaluating my financial situation so they could steal from me?" "They weren't evaluating. Sophia mentioned at Christmas that she was close to her savings goal. Probably has around $8,000 by now." I looked at Nathan with new eyes, seeing a stranger. "You've been reporting on my finances to your family? That's not what I was doing." "What would you call it?" Nathan sank back down onto the bench, looking defeated. "I was just talking. Family talks about things." "Your family talks about my money so they can steal it." "Sophie, please. You have to understand." "I understand perfectly." I handed him back his phone. "I understand that your entire family sees me as a resource to be exploited. I understand that my husband has been spying on my finances and reporting back to them. And I understand that none of you see anything wrong with stealing from me as long as it's for a good cause." "It's not stealing." "Stop saying that," I was shouting again, but I didn't care who heard me. "It is stealing. Taking someone's money without their permission is stealing. I don't care if you're married to them. I don't care if you think they'd eventually agree. I don't care if it's for a good cause. It's stealing." Nathan looked around nervously. "Sophie, people are staring." "Let them stare. Let them see what happens when someone steals $8,000 from their wife and then tries to convince her it's not theft." "Lower your voice. Don't tell me what to do with my voice. You've lost the right to tell me what to do with anything." I started walking toward my car. Nathan followed. "Where are you going?" "Home. We need to finish talking about this." "We're done talking." "Sophie, please." I turned around so fast he almost ran into me. "Do you want to know what the worst part of this is?" "What?" "It's not the money." "I think you're hurt, and you have every right to be. But you don't think you did anything wrong. I think I did what I had to do to protect my family. I'm your family too. Then why didn't you protect me?" Nathan didn't have an answer for that. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot of Riverside Park like a man who'd lost something but couldn't quite remember what it was. As I drove home, I realized that the worst part wasn't that Nathan had stolen from me. The worst part was that he'd done it while genuinely believing he was being a good husband, a good brother, a good man. And if he could believe that, if he could rationalize betraying me so completely while thinking he was doing the right thing, then I had never really known him at all. That night, I sat in my apartment, our apartment, and made the hardest decision of my life. Nathan had texted 17 times, called 12 times, and even shown up at the door twice. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I opened my laptop and did 3 things that changed everything. First, I changed every password I had: banking, email, social media, everything. Nathan's access to my financial life was over, permanently. Second, I called my parents in Crescent Falls. Through tears, I told them the whole story. My father, who rarely shows emotion, was quiet for a long time before saying, "Misha, come home. Tonight." But I wasn't running away, not this time. Third, I opened a new bank account at a different bank entirely. Whatever I rebuilt, it would be mine alone. Tuesday morning, Nathan was waiting by my car when I left for work. "Sophie, we need to talk." "No, we don't. I'm going to make this right." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing but exhaustion. How? "I'm taking out a loan. I'll pay you back every penny." "With what income? You don't make enough to cover a loan that big." "I'll get a second job." "Nathan, stop. I'll work nights, weekends, whatever it takes." "Stop," I said firmly. "It's not about the money anymore." "Then what is it about?" "It's about the fact that your family planned to steal from me for weeks, and you helped them do it. It's about the fact that when I found out, your first instinct was to justify it instead of apologize. It's about the fact that you still don't understand why I'm upset." He was quiet. "It's about the fact that I can't trust you anymore." "Sophie, I'm filing for divorce." The words hung in the air between us like a verdict. "You don't mean that." "I've already contacted a lawyer." His face crumpled. "Over money?" "Over betrayal. Over the fact that you chose your brother over your wife. Over the fact that your family thinks I'm a bank account with legs. We can fix this." "No, we can't, because you don't think it's broken." I got in my car and drove away from Nathan Reed for the last time. 6 months later, I was living in a studio apartment across town. Smaller than before, but it was mine. I'd started over from zero. No savings, no shared accounts, no husband reporting my financial business to his family. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Carson. "Hey, Sophie, Nathan told me about the divorce. I feel terrible about everything. I want to pay you back. Can we meet?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I don't want your money, Carson. I want you to leave me alone." "But I owe you." "You owe me nothing. We're not family anymore." I blocked the number and deleted the conversation. That night, for the first time in 6 months, I transferred $50 into a new savings account. It wasn't much, but it was a start. My emergency fund was gone, but my emergency was over. I was free. Tell me in the comments, was I right to leave everything behind for a fresh start? And if this helped you recognize any red flags in your own relationships, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones we need to protect ourselves from the most.